but not one of us had ever been inside the room. Not even me. Honestly. Except for that one time, which is kind of how I knew so much about the inside. Matt grabbed my shirt just above the elbow. "Let's get out of here," he said, still whispering. "Hank would have told us he was back." This wasn't quite true. Hank showed up and disappeared without warning all the time. But I didn't challenge my brother. I glanced at Ava. She wasn't moving. Matt himself didn't actually look ready to go. But neither of them really wanted to lead the way either. I'm always the one who goes first. "Fine," I said quietly. "I'll go check it out." Matt reached over to a small work table and grabbed a hammer. Ava shot him a look. "Really?" she mouthed. My brother, who had the muscles of an athlete but the fighting skills of a toddler, deflated like a popped balloon. Hammer or no hammer, he wasn't going to fight anyone. None of us were. He carefully replaced the tool, and we crossed the lab floor as quietly as ninjas. Now, about this laboratory, it's a little odd. Okay, more than a little. There's a giant water tank for testing submarines and robotic boats, and suits that let you stay underwater without air tanks. The glass-encased Mars room is a near-perfect copy of the landscape on the Red Planet. All kinds of vehicles and robots and enough computers to satisfy 2 classrooms full of kids are scattered around the place. And that's just the ground floor. Each of the platforms that wind up toward the ceiling supports its own miniature lab. The biosphere used to be on the 4th platform, but Hank redesigned it and moved it up a few floors. The first time Hank let us into his lab, I had no idea how he got from one platform to the next. The giant catapult capable of launching department store mannequins 50 feet in the air suggested he had some exciting plans, but he developed a much easier way up. And the rope dangling from the biosphere's platform suggested that the intruder hadn't found it. Ava grabbed the rope and gave it a gentle tug. "At least he didn't use Betsy," she said. Betsy wasn't a kid or a pet. My sister liked to name her inventions, and Betsy was a motorized device about the size of a blender that let you fire a long cable up to rooftops or balconies and then whisked you right up like Batman. Don't tell her I said that, though, because she hates superheroes. And look, Betsy was amazing, totally. Even if I had sprained my finger trying to use her the week before. But this wasn't the time for Betsy. We needed to be quiet and safe. "I'd rather go the normal way," I said. Ava flicked a red rubber toggle switch hidden behind a painting of a lighthouse. 24 metal steps popped out of the wall with a faint whoosh. They weren't connected to each other, only to the wall, and there was no railing either. Hank had covered each one with a thin square of rubber after Matt had tripped and banged his knees on the metal edges about a dozen times. Naturally, for this reason, I called the squares mats. Ava liked the joke. My brother, not so much. We hurried up the mats, and I stopped at the first platform to listen. Whoever was up there in the biosphere wasn't trying very hard to be quiet. Once or twice he shouted another curse, but I couldn't quite understand the swear. I flicked the switch for the stairs to the next platform, and we kept moving quietly and carefully, winding clockwise around the interior walls as we ascended. Each platform had its own focus. One was all about growing and harvesting cells. The second was a robotics workshop. Then there was a clean room for experiments that couldn't be contaminated with all the miniature bugs and microbes that crawl around the normal world, a tiny greenhouse, a 3D printing shop, and finally the biosphere. We stopped on the platform below, outside the 3D printing room. On the wall next to me was a painful reminder of one of the genius's most successful pranks. There was a hook and a hanger and a sign above them that read, "Invisibility Cloak."